Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. The first practice day of 2026 is done. There is no doubt this is a very different era of Formula 1, but all the key contenders in the mix. Verstappen fastest early doors, Piastri ended the day quickest, Mercedes accused of sandbagging at FP1, but apparently took them out at FP2. Ferrari, in terms of qualifying pace, look very competitive indeed, but the long run data tells a rather different story. Very much on Twitter, your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always, I greatly appreciate it. Thanks for all the support over these last couple of weeks, and we're going to begin with our favourite early video topic, and that of course is Aston Martin, because it's gone from bad to worse and it looks terrible from every single optic, and I don't understand how this is so much of a clown show with the operation that they were trying to put together over there. So Newey said today, who of course designer but also team principal of the team as it stands for the last few months, reveals that Aston only have 2 batteries left after they ran through quite a few in testing and they broke them all because the engine blew them apart effectively. So they have 2 left and they are currently in both cars. So if one of those batteries dies, then that's it. That car cannot run for the rest of the weekend, which is an absolute embarrassment on so many levels. And as Newey says, we have only 2 operational ones. We came with 4, but only 2 of them work, and those 2 that work are in the car. So given our rate of battery damage, it's a scary place to be in, he says. And Alonso was finally today, it's been coming, critical directly of Honda and their part to play in this shambles. He says, look, I'm just the one driving the car. When you're supplying parts to just one team, because this is a fair point, Mercedes have to make a lot of engines. They have to make a lot of batteries. They're supplying 4 teams. They've got themselves, McLaren, Williams, Alpine as it is this season. If they have issues, they need spares, right? So Mercedes have had to manufacture a lot. When you're just manufacturing for one team, you would presume that supply side constraints wouldn't be as much of an issue and you could, make plenty, because you're going to get through plenty in a season anyway. Of course, I guess you don't want to oversupply because they can make upgrades and stuff for reliability reasons, but basically performance reasons as the season goes on. So I do get that, but also Alonso's fair to say, look, when you've got no spare parts and you're only supplying to one team, no stock at all, that's disappointing to me. That's how it is. It would be more appropriate if you ask that question to them. And when asked whether he can race at this weekend, he was like, we can do it, which is maybe a positive, right? Maybe they found a solution so that the car won't just vibrate itself to bits and Alonso won't get permanent nerve damage in his hands. There have been talks that they might have found some solutions to dampen those vibrations, and we'll see if any of that actually comes true. But he says, yeah, we can probably do the race on Sunday, but Honda don't have the amount of supplies to make it happen because we don't have enough batteries. Like, what an absolute shambles. So Newey then went on to reveal a couple of new remarkable details, including saying that Alonso understandably is in a difficult spot mentally, right? Honda is actually haunting this poor guy's nightmares. Newey also went on to say that he feels powerless in the current situation. He's pretty confident the chassis they've put together is at least respectable at the very least. I know that Brundle asked Domenicali about this, and Domenicali says the worst thing you can do in Formula 1 is point fingers. And maybe there's some truth to that, but it's very clear that is exactly what Adrian Newey and Aston Martin are doing right now the way of Honda. And while a large part of this criticism is justified, I do think that a lot of the blame here falls on the way that Aston Martin have dealt with this situation. If they wanted to keep Mercedes power, they could have done. Their plan was to go down a works route with Honda, and that's understandable and even commendable on some level, given their ambitions to be the best in Formula 1. But Newey joined in like March last year. So he's not been, he's basically been at the team a year now designing the car. They've had this Honda plan in the works for a year. Since 2023, I think. That's when it was announced. It's been a 3-year runway for Aston Martin and Honda to get this relationship going. Now, Newey says something which I think is remarkable, because I think I could have told you this. I think you guys could have told Aston Martin this. They re-entered with, let's say, 30% of their original team. So as we know, they pulled out in 2021, and lots of those guys went to Red Bull powertrains, they went to other engine manufacturers, or, as we'll see him say in a second, they went to other disciplines entirely. Now, Newey says that when they came back in 23, they only had 30% of their original staff, and in a budget cap era, so they start on the back foot. They've struggled to catch up. Now, the crazy development here is that apparently Aston Martin didn't even visit Honda or the factory until November last year. This is like well over 2 years after they announced the partnership. Just assuming that, oh, well, it's Honda. They did well with Red Bull, right? So I'm sure that they've got it taken care of. Apparently, it took until there were rumours emerging that Honda might be a little bit behind before then Newey, Cowell, Lawrence Stroll decided to get out there to Japan, met up with Honda and realised, yeah, it's cooked, like it's bad. And apparently, lots of the original staff that worked on the previous Red Bull engines, some of them had left to other teams, as I mentioned. Some of them had gone to work on solar panels. And so like the team was totally gutted, dealing with a much more inexperienced staff, and maybe a staff that were a little bit too scared to tell Aston Martin that no, this ain't looking good. So, but this is like, yes, Honda deserve blame here, obviously, because they've probably promised things and not delivered anywhere near. But fundamentally, this is an Aston Martin problem, right? Because they signed this deal with Honda, and then what, just assumed that it was all going swimmingly and just Honda were on the phone being like, yeah, lads, we got it. Don't worry about it. Just Newey, keep designing that car, baby. We got everything you need. And then they turn up in November and they realise that actually, hang on a second, the staff that we've got working on this engine is much smaller team than we expected, loads of new faces. But how do you not realise that? Because I think we knew that, watching from the outside. But apparently Aston just went years without even visiting Honda and assessing the situation. So as much as Honda are at fault for what they've delivered on this power unit side, for sure, this is Aston Martin's doing on some level, from the decision making to the lack of I mean, what are they doing all day, right? They're just spending all their time hiring new top level theoretical staff and trying to piece together their components on their side, because they're hiring so many new people from all different elements and trying to find a way to fit it together, just assuming that Honda have got it all sorted on the other side of the Pacific. It's like, yeah, sure, that's going to work. So what an absolute mess. I don't think this is going to get resolved anytime soon. Apparently Sky Italy has been saying they're trying to find a way to get disqualified so they don't even have to take part, because if they don't take part voluntarily, they break the Concord agreement and are liable for a huge amount of fines. So that's not what they want. So they want to find a way maybe to get disqualified. I don't know how this is going to happen. They have reached the 107% threshold so far, at least in practice. So they will be in qualifying, at least. That's how it appears right now. So yes, complete shambles. And to make matters worse, Alonso didn't even run in the first practice session because they had a power unit issue. Who is surprised there? Aston Martin even tweeted this out. I thought it was hilarious. At the end of FP2, they say to a load of replies, I'm not going to look at them, but you can imagine what they might be saying. Data gathered. So yeah, here we go, baby. Aston Martin are winning the Data Gathering Championship 2026. But let's talk about practice, because today really gave us a glimpse of what this year is going to look like when it comes to the racing, the super clipping, but also just the way that the teams conduct practice. Typically, practice is setup work. We work 3 hours on what the setup of the car is. To be honest, today, the vast majority of it was energy deployment mapping. That is the new name of the game in practice, and it's not really about the setup right now, which is very interesting. I think it's going to mean sprint weekends are a complete mess, and it's going to be all over the place, because the teams have an hour to figure out their energy deployment mapping, is what I'm going to call it, and their setup, which is a huge challenge. So let's talk about why. This is Isaac Hadjar over the grass. There were some very expensive lawnmowers out there today. But early doors, it was looking really good for the Red Bull, right? Mercedes were quite a way off the pace, but stay tuned for that one. Lots of sandbagging accusations flying around. The Ferraris very much in the mix, but it was the Red Bulls, after some talk from Mercedes that they are very much a team to watch, that were early doors leading the pace. What is incredible is that there is a huge difference in certain corners between speeds. And this comes down to how they're trying to recover energy via what they're calling super clipping, which is basically using all of the 550 odd horsepower of the internal combustion engine, not using all of it to the wheels, but using a sizable chunk of that power to literally just drive the motor to regenerate the energy. And I'm sure that those MGUKs, like the batteries, the motors are going to be under huge stress. Like the amount of charge that they're going through must be, there's going to be failures this year, no doubt about it. But you can see here like differentials in average speeds, like average apex speed versus average top speed. So there's huge variation here, and it's not just in car performance from a pure aerodynamic perspective, but it's very much to do with how the teams are deciding to use their power. So this is when, quite early on, Russell was away off the pace. But you can see here that, for example, at turn 6, Russell has a significantly higher top speed than Max or Charles. So he's using deployment there. Whereas when they go through the back straight, his top speed is way lower because he's not got as much juice. So the teams are figuring out, this is basically what today was all about, is figuring out how we deploy power most appropriately. I think what it creates in terms of a frustration from a fan perspective, you can see a very clear example right here of between Russell and Leclerc. Russell using more deployment in this corner, having a huge speed advantage over Leclerc at this point, 50 kph or so over him. But then on the next straight, Leclerc had more juice and was able to maintain top speed for longer. It's also just worth looking at this image because you might be a little confused by the lines on this graphic, being like, well, hang on a second here. This is a straight, so why isn't the speed just keeping on increasing, right? And if you compare it to last year, the very traditional orange or papaya line here of Norris's McLaren, you can see that, yeah, the speed increases to the end of the straight, then maybe there's a little bit of clipping. So the clipping is when the 15% electrical side would run out of juice, so your speed would tail off and slightly decrease, but not radically so. But you can see that the old lines from last year are the traditional lines. This year we have very confusing curves on this type of graph that you would not expect to see, at least based on last year's engine mapping. This year, very different story. I think what frustrates me about this, Bahrain, as the weekend went on, got a little bit better because there actually is some energy recovery. But on this circuit, recovering energy is so challenging that we are seeing tons of super clipping, right? We are seeing tons of corners where the teams are deliberately going slower than they could just to recharge the battery. And that means that there are a lot of corners around this circuit, even in qualifying, where the cars are not grip limited. And I think that is going to be, from a viewership perspective, kind of a turn off at some point. I am fascinated by what this means, especially for the first half of the season. There's so much nuance in these practice sessions, so much to learn and to understand. There's a lot of things that interest me about this, but I think that there's a very likely possibility that halfway through this year we look at things and say, this is kind of mid at the very least, and we're watching cars go through corners where the driver is not on the limit of traction, right? He's not on the limit of what the tyres are able to give him. He's on the limit of what he's got to do for the battery for the next corner, and I just don't think that's going to be anywhere near as interesting to watch or to drive. There is still a challenge. The best drivers will still make the difference. The worst cars will still make the difference. But the circuits like Melbourne that are more energy limited, we will see a lot of cars, and I'm like, is he pushing, or is he on a push lap? Are we sure? Because he doesn't look like he's on the ragged edge there. Some corners they still will be, but I think it's going to be a very different season for Formula One, and I don't know if it's going to last, is my overall opinion of day one. But I mean, I will say I'm fascinated by all the details, because we talk about circuits typically, are they front limited, are they rear limited, are they traction limited, what's going on this weekend. But there's way more to it than that now, right? We've got to think about setup and energy deployment. And that piece is the piece that nobody really has their heads fully wrapped around right now. Congrats to Aston Martin. They did a lap. It was 33 seconds off their lap from last year. Hamilton was also talking with, Carlos Santi, who's his race engineer for now, about feedback, because he was behind Leclerc And he was very adamant to be like, where's the lap time? And what's very confusing again is that when you hear the race engineers talk about this, they talk about power limited. And effectively that is how much generator power you've got from the recharge, right? So it's super confusing. As Hamilton says, it's power limited. Where's the power limit? Sunty says power limits between 2 and 3. Same second sector, same third sector. 2 and 3 is not helping. Is it apex speed? Is it exit? And he says it's power limit, which is like a classic Ferrari engineer response. So Hamilton's like, mate, that's not helping me. Help me understand. And I think this is, it's right for Hamilton to push back on this and say, look, I'm trying to win the championship this year. Every point matters. Ferrari clearly have a car which is somewhere in the ballpark. So let me know what I need to know. That doesn't help me. Is it exit or apex? It's apex. I don't care about power limit. Okay, is apex too high or too low? Give me some feedback, right? So he's effectively saying, what sort of speed do I need to take the apex? I can take the apex at absolute maximum, the limit of the car. But if I don't do that, then I generate more power, so I'm not power limited down the next straight. It's a mess. I'm not going to lie. It is a mess. The drivers have to figure out what this what can you even say on the radio? It's like, yeah, we need you to go 255 through that corner rather than 265, which you could, because we're going to do a bit of super clipping. Is that even something the driver can control, or is that something the pit wall controls by cranking up the knob on the MGUK? I don't even know right now. The end of first practice, it was Leclerc, Hamilton, Verstappen, and it's like, here we go, ladies and gentlemen. We have a season. Ferrari are back. Now, did Ferrari do some glory runs at the ends? You can debate that. Lindblad was 5th, by the way. Definitely notable this first practice session in the Racing Bull. So, something to keep your eyes on there. Alonso didn't run. Stroll did 3 laps and was 30 seconds off. It is what it is. But he did get a better lap in later in the day. There was a bit of drama in FP2 as well. Russell and Lindblad here had a little bit of an incident. We also saw Russell into the gravel and plenty of other drivers into the gravel as well. This is Hamilton having a moment. I think this is both of those at turn 3. Tricky corner, of course, at the end of that second straight. This was Verstappen having a huge moment at turn 9-10 onto the gravel. Tons of pieces of his car were flying off as well, so that definitely caused some damage. This, I think, was Sergio Perez. Unfortunately, his Cadillac did not survive, so there was a VSC. So, but, the Cadillac wasn't fast, but it's not Aston Martin, so that's keeping things better. However, Alonso did get a lap in eventually within the 107%, so they should at least be able to qualify whatever happens tomorrow. But this was an embarrassing radio again. He pushed for 2 sectors, and then he was like, well, I guess we've got to do about 5 laps of cooldown now to recharge the battery. And his engineer tells him, yeah, we're not going to charge up in time, mate. So this is the thing. Even the Mercedes engine is struggling with the power demands of this circuit, let alone whatever Honda have cooked up, right? So you can see the differential between some of the drivers here, between Piastri's lap at the bottom, Antonelli's and Hamilton's, where they're on the throttle and the brake. The issue is this data just doesn't tell you that much, because they can be on full throttle, but be using that throttle to charge the battery, as we've mentioned. So it is interesting. You can see some of the lift and coast. But, for example, Antonelli doesn't do any lift and coast, because arguably, instead of lifting and coasting, you just mash the throttle, and the engine is clever enough to know to use that to charge the battery rather than doing the lift coast. So you see Piastri's doing a lot of lift coast here on a quali lap. That's one approach. Hamilton's doing a bit of lift coast as well. Antonelli isn't doing any, but it doesn't mean that he's not charging the battery, and this shows throttle application, not speed, and really speed is the critical factor here. So I hope you guys are kind of following all this, but I don't think F1 has made it easy for the fans this year. However, this is when Mercedes started to really show what they were capable of. Not too many long runs in this session. We did get some running on the hards. Hamilton did a few laps and they were reasonable. Verstappen, obviously there was traffic and stuff in play as well. Piastri, Norris did a few laps, but no one was really able to match what Mercedes did in this session. Russell and Antonelli. Russell was averaging a 123.7, Antonelli at a 124.1, but look at Antonelli's, obviously Russell is true as well, but look at that consistency, 0.10000, like that's pretty special. And then towards the end of the stint he went a little bit quicker. Russell had a couple of really fast outliers, and obviously there's traffic in play here as well, so his was a little bit more variable. But in terms of speed, the general consensus is, based on these race runs, not many teams really got any proper race runs in, but of those that did, it was very clear that Mercedes are the team to beat. So that's the takeaway. The other takeaway is this. We got a bit of a glimpse as well as a start, and I know that Leclerc here, oh, it's been destroyed apparently. Looks like that video has been disabled in real time by the copyright owner. Eventually what happened there was Leclerc got away better than George Russell did. He did leave the starting gate a little bit earlier, but his acceleration was clearly better. So the takeaway from today from the Ferrari and from the Mercedes perspective is that Mercedes look to have the edge in terms of long run pace. Maybe not even the edge, maybe it's substantial, I don't know. There is a good argument that on these more power limited circuits, the engine advantage is exacerbated. If you've got an engine advantage, you will really feel it around circuits like Melbourne. And we think Mercedes probably have an engine advantage, so I wouldn't be that surprised if it's Mercedes and McLaren that are really the chief contenders. And we saw Piastri put in the fastest lap of anyone today. Again, there are caveats. Mercedes obviously are up there. Ferrari are in the mix. In quali pace over a single lap, when it's just about one lap deployment, they're absolutely in the mix, no doubt. Hamilton was ahead of Leclerc by a couple of tenths in this session. We'll discuss why as well in a second, which I thought was interesting. But over the long runs, the consensus is Mercedes should have the edge. But if Ferrari qualify well and their starts still look really good, they could be leading the race. And if they are, then, you know, dirty air's a problem. Who knows what happens from there? So it's all to play for. Leclerc says, I don't know what Mercedes are going to look like in qualifying, but on race pace, they are much stronger than we are. FP1 was positive, obviously, for Ferrari. FP2, they're on the back foot, he says. It is the first time that we have seen how much there is to them, and it's a bit more than we would have liked. So, yeah, kind of a wordy way to say that Mercedes finally took the sandbags out, and the sandbags are a bit heavier than we expected, or at least than we hoped for. Now, it looks like Ferrari, according to De Keyser here, because yes, the teams were spending most of their time and energy, I imagine, today trying to figure out what is the optimal power deployment strategy for the best possible lap time for our engine and power unit. And it will differ across teams as well. There won't be one single solution here, which means that you will get cars that are far quicker than others in certain sections, just because that's their preferred way to execute and to deploy. But they weren't just doing that. The teams are also trying to figure out setup direction, and Ferrari apparently went the wrong way on that in FP2, and Melbourne is more front limited as a circuit. So with the, let's say if the balance shifts a little bit away from what Leclerc wants, he suffers more than Hamilton does. So I thought that was kind of interesting, and yeah, Hamilton seems in a decent spot himself regardless. Red Bull and Verstappen were the key talking point to the first 20 minutes of the day, not as much after that, and Verstappen says, yeah, we're pretty much where we thought we'd be, in the mix, but if we want to fight at the front, we've got to be faster than we presently are. So these were some of the sector times, and you can see, I mean, the further down you go, there are huge differentials here, right? Like even between the Alpine, for example, or the Williams, like they're right down at the bottom of these lists, which is a little bit unexpected, I would say, given the Mercedes power you'd think might give them the edge. Sector 2, there aren't many corners, so that's tighter. But in Sector 1 and Sector 3, you're talking 1.2 tenths of 1.2 seconds difference in that sector, and that's not even considering the Cadillac or the Aston Martin, right? That's down to like the 8th or the 9th team. So we'll see what happens tomorrow for qualifying. These were some of the top speeds as well between the various teams. It's absolutely all over the place right now. It's all to play for sure. Mercedes look like the favourites for the weekends, but Piastri's in the mix in his home race. Ferrari are in the mix as well, we think, and there are plenty of problems up and down the grid. So, yeah, hope that was a reasonable assessment of what's currently happening at F1, because as I said right at the onset of the video, it's a very different sport. It's a very different year of Formula 1. The considerations that we have to make as fans are radically changed, and I think it's intriguing, definitely. I don't know if in the long term it's going to prove to be good, but there are a lot of factors in play for who the best driver and car is going to be this season, and right now we don't really know. So very much enjoyed your thoughts in a comment. I'll talk to you guys after qualifying tomorrow. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.